House lawmakers just wrapped up debate over billions in the state's budget, just days after gutting many of the governor's priorities. At the center of debate, priorities focused on teacher pay raises and early education programs. The question is where that money is going to come from. The Louisiana GOP does not want to exceed the spending cap, so the House Appropriations Committee cut almost $200 million for teacher pay raises and $50 million in early education, steering that money toward paying off retirement debt instead. The Republican supermajority held to those cuts today, rejecting two amendments on the floor that would have restored the funds. Every central Louisiana lawmaker except Democrat Ed Laverdane voted against the amendments. But early education could receive funding if and only if lawmakers choose to repeal the movie tax credit that was approved earlier in the week by a majority vote. That proposal coming from Republican lawmaker Tanner McGee. The movie tax credit still needs Senate approval, and so does the budget, so these changes may not hold. The House GOP Chairman Blake Miguez released a statement on the budget saying in part, quote, "We're proud to be addressing one of our state's biggest challenges while simultaneously paying off debt. Fiscal responsibility and educational excellence go hand in hand. Together, we're building a brighter future for our children and our state." And the House Democrats responding, claiming it does not embody Louisiana's values, in part saying, quote, "House Democrats cannot in good conscience vote for a budget that denies thousands of children a seat in early childhood education, refuses our hardworking teachers of a much-deserved pay raise, and divests in higher education."